Do you have any reason to question their recollection of what you told them?
All I can say is that I expressed what I told, or what the president told me in that text. And if I had relayed anything other than what was in that text, I don't recall.
You don't recall?
I don't recall.
You have no reason to question Ambassador Taylor or Mr. Morrison of what they wrote in their notes about your conversation with them.
Could you kindly repeat what they wrote?
I'll have Mr. Goldman go through that with you.
That'd be great.
But let me get to the top line here, Ambassador Sondland.
Okay.
You've testified that the White House meeting that President Zelensky desperately wanted, and that was very important to President Zelensky, was it not?
Absolutely.
You've testified that that meeting was a quid pro quo for what the president wanted, these two investigations. Is that right?
Correct.
And that everybody knew it?
Correct.
Now, that White House meeting was going to be an official meeting between the two presidents, correct?
Presumably.
It would be an Oval Office meeting, hopefully?
A working meeting, yes.
Working meeting. So an official act,
yeah.
Correct? And in order to perform that official act, Donald Trump wanted these two investigations that would help his reelection campaign, correct?
I can't characterize why he wanted them. All I can tell you is this is what we heard from Mr. Giuliani.
But he had to get those two investigations if that official act was going to take place, correct?
He had to announce the investigations. He didn't actually have to do them, as I understood it.
Okay. President Zelensky had to announce the two investigations the president wanted, make a public announcement, correct?
Correct.
And those were of great value to the president. He was quite insistent upon them, and his attorney was insistent upon them?
I don't want to characterize whether they are value or not value. Again, through Mr. Giuliani, we were led to believe that that's what he wanted.
Well, and you said that Mr. Giuliani was acting at the president's demand, correct?
Right. When the president says, talk to my personal lawyer, Mr. Giuliani, we followed his direction.
And so that official act of that meeting was being conditioned on the performance of these things the president wanted, as expressed both directly and through his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, correct?
As expressed through Rudy Giuliani, correct.
And you've also testified that your understanding, it became your clear understanding, that the military assistance was also being withheld pending Zelensky announcing these investigations, correct?
That was my presumption, my personal presumption based on the facts at the time. Nothing was moving.
And, in fact, you had a discussion, communication with the Secretary of State in which you said that logjam over aid could be lifted if Zelensky announced these investigations, right?
I don't recall saying the logjam over aid. I recall saying the logjam. I don't know that.
That's what you meant, right, Ambassador?
I meant that whatever was holding up the meeting, whatever was holding up our deal with Ukraine, I was trying to break. Again, I was presuming.
Well, here's what you said in your testimony a moment ago.
Okay.
Page 18. But my goal at the time was to do what was necessary to get the aid released to break the logjam. Okay, that's still your testimony, right?
Yeah.
So the military aid is also an official act. Am I right?
Yes.
This is not President Trump's personal bank account he's writing a check from. This is $400 million of U.S. taxpayer money, is it not?
Absolutely.
And there was a logjam in which the president would not write that U.S. check, you believed, until Ukraine announced these two investigations the president wanted, correct?
That was my belief.
Mr. Goldman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your opening statement, Ambassador Sondland, you detailed the benefits that you have gained from obtaining some additional documents over the past few weeks. Is that right?
In terms of refreshing my recollection. That's
right, because reviewing these documents has helped you to remember the events that we're asking about. Is that correct?
Correct.
Because you acknowledge, of course, that when you can place a document and a date and a context, it helps to jog your memory.
That's correct.
And so you would agree that for people unlike yourself who take notes, that is very helpful to their own recollection of events, right?
I think you asked your question backwards. Are you saying people that take notes, it's helpful to have those documents, or people that don't take notes, it's helpful to have those documents?
No. You are not a note taker, right?
I'm not a note taker, never have been.
But you would agree that people who do take contemporaneous notes generally are more able to remember things than people who don't.
Some, yes.
And there are additional documents that you've been unable to obtain, is that right?
That's correct.
And I think you even said in your opening statement that the State Department prevented you and your staff from trying to gather more documents. Is that correct?
Certain documents, yes.
Which documents?
Documents that I didn't have immediate access to.
And who at the State Department prevented you from doing that?
You'll have to ask my counsel. He was dealing with them.
But certainly based on the additional memory that you have gained over the past few weeks from reading the testimony of others based on their notes and reviewing your own documents, you have remembered a lot more than you did when you were deposed. Is that right?
That's correct.
And one of the things that you now remember is the discussion that you had with President Trump on July 26th in that restaurant in Kiev, right?
Yeah, what triggered my memory was someone's reference to ASAP Rocky, which was, I believe, the primary purpose of the phone call.
Certainly. So that's one way memory works, isn't it? And you were sitting in a restaurant with David Holmes in Kiev, right, having lunch?
I think I took the whole team out to lunch after the meeting, yeah.
And it was a meeting, a one-on-one meeting you had with Andrei Yermak?
Again, trying to reconstruct a very busy day without the benefit. But if someone said I had a meeting and I went to the meeting, then I'm not going to dispute that.
And particularly if that person took notes at that meeting?
Correct.
Or sat outside the door when you didn't let them in?
I have no control over who goes into a meeting in Ukraine. That was the Ukrainians that didn't let them in.
And you had also met with President Zelensky, among others, that day. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you called President Trump from your cell phone from the restaurant. Is that right?
That's right.
And this was not a secure line, was it?
No, it was an open line.
Did you worry that a foreign government may be listening to your phone call with the President of the United States?
Well, I have unclassified conversations all the time from landlines that are unsecured and cell phones. If the topic is not classified, and it's up to the president to decide what's classified and what's not classified, and we were having, he was aware that it was an open line as well.
And you don't recall the specifics of holding your phone outside, far away from your ear, as Mr. Holmes testified, but you have no reason to question his recollection of that, do you?
I mean, it seems a little strange I would hold my phone here. I probably had my phone close to my ear, and he claims to have overheard part of the conversation, and I'm not going to dispute what he did or didn't hear.
Well, he also testified that you confirmed to President Trump that you were in Ukraine at the time, and that President Zelensky, quote, loves your ass, unquote. Do you recall saying that?
Yeah, it sounds like something I would say. That's how President Trump and I communicate. A lot of four-letter words. In this case, three-letter.
Holmes then said that he heard President Trump ask, quote, is he, meaning Zelensky, going to do the investigation? To which you replied, he's going to do it. And then you added that President Zelensky will do anything that you, meaning President Trump, ask him to. Do you recall that?
I probably said something to that effect because I remember the meeting. President Zelensky was very solicitous is not a good word. He was just very willing to work with the United States and was being very amicable. And so putting it in Trump speak by saying he loves your ass, he'll do whatever you want, meant that he would really work with us on a whole host of issues.
He was not only willing, he was very eager, right?
That's fair.
Because Ukraine depends on the United States as its most significant ally. Isn't that correct?
One of its most, absolutely.
So, just so we understand, you you were in Kiev the day after President Trump spoke to President Zelensky on the phone, and you now know from reading the call record that in that phone call he requested a favor for President Zelensky to do investigations related to the Bidens and the 2016 election, right?
I do now know that, yes.
And you met with President Zelensky and his aides on the day after that phone call. And then you had a conversation with President Trump from your cell phone from a restaurant terrace. And he asked you whether President Zelensky will do the investigations. And you responded that he's going to do them, or it, and that President Zelensky will do anything you ask him to do. Is that an accurate recitation of what happened there?
It could have been words to that effect. I don't remember my exact response.
But you don't have any reason to dispute Mr. Holmes' recollection, correct?
I won't dispute it, but again, I don't recall.
After you hung up with the president, Mr. Holmes testified about a conversation that you and he had where he says that you told Mr. Holmes that the president does not care about Ukraine, but the president used the more colorful language, including a four-letter word that you just referenced. Do you recall saying that to Mr. Holmes?
Again, I don't recall my exact words, but clearly the president, beginning on May 23rd, when we met with him in the Oval Office, was not a big fan.
But he was a big fan of the investigations.
Apparently so.
And in fact, Mr. Holmes said that you said that President Trump only cares about the, quote, big stuff that benefits himself. Is that something that you would have said at the time?
I don't think I would have said that. I would have honestly said that he was not a big fan of Ukraine, and he wants the investigations that we had been talking about for quite some time to move forward. That's what I would have said, because that's the fact.
Mr. Holmes also remembers that you told him, in giving an example of the big stuff, the Biden investigation that Rudy Giuliani was pushing. Do you recall that?
I don't. I recall Burisma, not Biden.
But do you recall saying, at least referring to an investigation that Rudy Giuliani was pushing? Is that something that you likely would have said?
I would have, yes.
Now, even if you don't recall specifically mentioning the Biden investigation to David Holmes, we know that it was certainly on President Trump's mind. Because just the day before, in his call with President Zelensky, he mentions specifically the Biden investigation. And I want to show you that exhibit, or that excerpt from the call on July 25th, where President Trump says, the other thing, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution, so if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. President Zelensky then responds with a reference to the company that he's referring to, and two witnesses yesterday said that when President Zelensky actually said the company, he said Burisma. So you would agree that regardless of whether you knew about the connection to the Bidens, at the very least that you now know that that's what President Trump wanted at the time through the Burisma investigation.
I now know it all, of course.
And at this time, you were aware of the president's desire, along with Rudy Giuliani, to do these investigations, including the 2016 election interference investigation. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you said President Trump had directed you to talk, you and the others, to talk to Rudy Giuliani at the Oval Office on May 23rd. Is that right?
If we wanted to get anything done with Ukraine, it was apparent to us we needed to talk to Rudy.
Right. You understood that Mr. Giuliani spoke for the president, correct?
That's correct.
And, in fact, President Trump also made that clear to President Zelensky. In that same July 25th phone call, he said, Mr. Giuliani is a highly respected man. He was the mayor of New York City, a great mayor, and I would like him to call you. I will ask him to call you along with the Attorney General. Rudy